Good evening, everyone. I'm Gina Duncan. I'm the Director of Transgender Equality at Equality Florida, the state's largest LGBTQ advocacy organization. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you to TransChat, a virtual town hall series on the transgender experience. Over the next 4 days, you'll hear from community leaders, from advocates from across the state, discussing the community's challenges, victories, and hopefully sharing some inspirational personal stories. Over the next 4 days, we're thrilled to bring you different perspectives in reference to the transgender community. Today, we'll be talking about the trans masculine experience. Tomorrow, we'll be talking about the Black trans experience and the dynamics of people of color in the trans community. On Wednesday, we'll be talking to advocates and leaders about non-binary experiences. And then Thursday, rounding out our series, will be a discussion with our Transaction Advisory Council, who set the strategy, policy, and programs for our transaction initiative all across the state. I'm especially to be thrilled to bring you an amazing panel today. Let me start off by introducing our first panelist, Lucas Wale. Lucas has dedicated his life to social justice advocacy. While transitioning during being in college and his college career at USF, Lucas became passionate about helping others in the community through personal storytelling, leading classes and workshops, and mentoring other transgender students at USF. In 2015, Lucas joined Metro Inclusive Health in his dream job as the Trans and Youth Program Coordinator, developing trans outreach, raising awareness of the trans and the LGBTQ community at large. Lucas was the youngest Grand Marshal at the St. Pete Pride, one of the nation's largest prides. And in 2018, Lucas led the creation of Metro's Trans Services Division. Lucas, it's so good to have you with us. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Gina. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Next joining us is Tristan Burns. Tristan is a licensed mental health counselor, a gender therapist, supporting the transgender community for over 10 years now, with private practice in Pinellas Park. Tristan has worked with Metro Inclusive Health in St. Pete, running the trans masculine and trans feminine support groups. Tristan also is staying busy, working on his first book that focuses on assisting family members and loved ones in supporting transgender and non-binary family members. As a transgender male himself, Tristan focuses on the rights and protections of the community, and that continues to be his life passion. Help me welcoming Tristan Burns. Tristan, welcome.
Hi, thanks, Gina. I'm glad to be here.
Good to have you.
Yeah.
And then lastly, Ty Williams. Ty Williams has an amazing journey to joining us today. His career in public health was really not part of his original life journey. He moved to Southern California really to expand his horizons in the culinary field. In California, he began, however, to observe the community being impacted by HIV and especially impacting the Black transgender community. He advocated for living with HIV, led in creating and leading the California chapter of Black trans men and POC transmasculine advocacy group Brotherhood. All this while holding down his day job, interestingly enough, as the head chef for San Diego's Girl Scout of America camp in San Diego. He returned to Florida to focus on making a difference in Florida, which is always a challenge. And then in 2020, he was summoned to Washington, D.C. to serve as project coordinator for a community education group, and which is centered on trans liberation and HIV prevention. So as you can see, we have a distinguished, knowledgeable, and amazing panel today, and we hope to have an amazing discussion, and we hope to also field your questions and go deep in reference to understanding the trans-masculine experience today. So Lucas, let me kick off with you if I may. Transitioning at UCF, transitioning while in college. If you could share a little bit about that story, what was especially meaningful during your transition experience, and perhaps what were some of the challenges that you faced while transitioning at college?
Yeah, definitely. So I went to USF in 2010. I started right after I graduated high school, and I was there for 5 years every semester, so including summer. So I was always busy. And I came out in like my second semester at USF. I had kind of talked to a friend or two before that, but it really wasn't until I actually heard Dr. Greenwald speak at the time on campus at our health center. And when I had really learned or heard anything about anyone's experience in the trans community before. I was raised in a really conservative area in Plant City. Went to high school in Plant City and was really involved in my church. And it had a really negative impact on my coming out experience. And I actually did face a lot of rejection from my church family and a lot of local families and friends that I grew up with in my hometown, because nobody knew what it meant to be trans, and everyone was really very anti-LGBT because of how we were brought up and what we were taught, and that was wrong, etc. So going to college was really my first positive experience, or any experience in an inclusive environment, and that was really through getting involved in the Pride Student Union. And then, like I said, later on, hearing Dr. Greenwald talk specifically about trans folks. So when I first came out, I really was like one of the only out trans people on campus that was open to sharing my experience and talking about my experience. And so I just started doing that over the next several years of my college career, and that's where I became really passionate about working within the community and helping other people get to where I am today.
Do you think that your informational work then, I know that we've done quite a bit of work in doing transgender cultural competency workshops at USF. Did you see those foundational kind of that movement there when you were transitioning at USF?
At first, I don't think there was enough going on. I don't think the university was doing as much as they could to reach out and do those types of trainings. And I say that because I really was being utilized quite often. So it told me that I was kind of one of the only people that was answering those questions or having those conversations. But then as the Safe Zone training, I was on the team that revamped the Safe Zone training. And once that became more inclusive, that was a good move. And then once I was involved in like the Trans Student Union, we would have people like yourself come and speak at events, and we had more involvement with Equality Florida and organizations like that. Later on, I'd say maybe 2013, 2014 and beyond. But nowadays, yeah, I mean, I see that integration all the time. I see those interactions and what do you call it? Partnerships often. But back then, I don't think we were doing as much for the trans community as we could have been. And I think it simply was there just wasn't a whole lot of conversation or a lot of education still. It was 10 years ago, and that was, we were a lot further along now than we were back then. So
yeah, we certainly have come a long way in 10 years.
Exactly, yeah.
Tristan, let me ask you, in your journey, have you found, and I would think so, but have you found that your personal experiences assist you in your counseling work and also in reference to the workshops that you lead?
Yeah, absolutely. I came out originally 15 years ago. And so there's a lot of, hold on, there we go. Sorry, feedback. There's a lot of non-knowledge at the time. There was like one therapist in the area that saw most of the clients. There was one doctor that saw most of the community. And so it was really important for me at that point it's what made me decide to go into mental health. I was 34 when I came out. I finished my master's degree at 36, 38, somewhere in there. So it's what made me do it, because I realized that there was a definite need in the area. And of course, I think part of why people come to me, I think, is because of my background, because they know I completely understand their journey, where they're coming from, where they're going, where they want to go. They know that I'm not going to really be a gatekeeper for them, because I understand where they're coming from, and I'm not questioning, the fact that they can have anxiety and be trans at the same time. I'm not questioning that at all. I'm just accepting where they are. And I joke with most of my clients that if they're not a little anxious, then that worries me more than anything else. Because it's a big life change, so you got to be a little anxious. So I would hope. And then, of course, my experience being able to do forums like this, and when I'm either taking workshops to Philadelphia Trans Health Conference, as I've done before, my background comes into that a lot, as well as just knowing what needs to happen. Like, my idea for my book even just came from talking to parents of my clients who were like, there is nothing out there for adults. I mean, there's stuff for children, but my book's actually geared for like people for like my mom, who didn't have anything when I came out at 34. And so, not to plug my book, because it doesn't really matter, but it's just that lack of knowledge that's out there, and that lack of information that's out there. And it's important to get that information out there. And it's just, I mean, we have come a long way in 10 years. We've definitely come a lot longer than the 15 years, but there's still a long way to go in regards to knowledge and information. As we know, or we wouldn't be doing this forum, right? Like, that's why we're doing it. So
yeah, and I would think that just seeing a role model like yourself, who's successful in the community, who's a community leader, leading TDOR events, things like that, and now writing a book, would be inspirational for a lot of people. So
yeah, I hope
good work, and thank you for that.
Thank you.
Moving to Ty, joining us from Washington, D.C., the frozen tundra up north. And Ty, that kind of speaks to your journey has gone from California to Florida and now to D.C. Can you talk a little bit about your observations in reference to trans inclusion, trans equality, that has varied in your experience in those different locales? I know that California versus Florida versus DC are three completely different environments for the transgender community. You're living those. So what are you seeing, and what do you see that needs to be done?
First, I would say that when I first moved to California, it was just to have a job. It was just basic search, just surviving. It was just making sure that I was able to take care of myself. I was privileged enough to be in California to see how their healthcare worked. I will say that was the first place that I experienced being in San Diego, where my doctor didn't just want to know my name, but wanted to know like personal things like about my health that could help me. That was the first person to introduce me to what PrEP was. Like, do you know what these things are? I didn't, even though I had knew about it, I kind of heard about it, but to actually go into details and being a trans man, I was like, okay, wow, like this is something really different. Like it was really welcoming. And I would say that it was also welcoming to the point where people think that California is, even though they're far along and advanced, they're not really as advanced as they think they are when it comes down to culturally. So seeing that intersection was like, I kind of missed that with like the Southern hospitality thing. So I was able to like learn how to navigate that, whereas like little things where it's like, putting money on the counter where you put it in your hand. Southern's like, you don't do those type of things. Just little stuff like that. I had to like navigate, like, wow, like this is totally different. But healthcare wise, I loved it. Then I would say flipping over to moving to Florida, I would say community wise was very welcoming. It was a little harder to navigate the health, trying to figure out where to go to get, my testosterone and to make sure I stayed on my medication or whatnot. But after I got there, I was just kind of like looking at some of the things where like, we're still doing these things. Like we're so far behind. Like it's 2019 and we're still like not asking he, him, his pronouns. We're still trying to say, oh, what's a transgender? And it's just like, wow. And I'm in Orlando, and it's just like, wow, like this is an area where it's kind of like a little far advanced, but hey, they'll get there. And so seeing those type of things, and again, I was still trying to navigate maintaining surviving and knowing how to still be a chef and still how to navigate, just being a Black man. So those type of things. To move to DC, where kind of like California, very inclusive, but I feel it's a very mixture though. DC is, I feel like you got like the Southern hospitality mixed with the city, so you kind of get a big melting pot. So I feel like now that I done went from the South to the West Coast, I'm like just seeing everyone everywhere. It's kind of like, okay, cool. But I will say that it helped me navigate being trans and understanding where people and meeting people where it's at, kind of like what Tristan said. You have to kind of like meet people where they are. And that's one thing that helped me do, because I was so closed-minded being, in Florida, just saying one area, but then going over here, I had to learn how to navigate these things and understand that these people, they're not different. It's just an open mindset. So learning how to do that, I will say that I enjoyed and I appreciate it, and it's very valuable.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And remind me to circle back. I do want to learn from you what's kind of the feeling on the ground in DC about this current administration. Like, what's the bar talk? What are people actually saying?
I love that. What's the bar talk?
Right. What's actually being said? So let me go to Lucas again. Kind of going global. What are your thoughts in reference to what are you seeing? What are you observing? What are you living in reference to? What are the main challenges facing the trans community, and especially trans masculine presenting and identifying men? And also, have you seen progress? Have we gone back during this administration? Have we played defense too much? Are we holding ground? Or what do you see as those issues, and where are we moving?
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest issue always stems back to education. We still don't have anywhere near enough education anywhere for, just our general society, general, members of our country and our local communities to understand what it is to be a trans person, what it means to be a trans person, our experiences, and how to just respect us as general human beings, right? So I think it all starts there, and that's a much broader thing, but can be also worked on smaller levels, right? So Metro does inclusivity trainings, Equality Florida does inclusivity trainings. We all, try to tackle different parts of the areas and the communities and businesses and health centers and everything. But it's not overall, it's not just being, pushed from like our government or anything. It's not something that everyone is doing, right? Or a requirement for everyone. And it should be, because there's trans people everywhere, right? And LGBT people everywhere. So I think that's the biggest hurdle that causes, that's really the source of all of that, and the misunderstanding and really any type of discrimination or anything like that we face. But I think one of the biggest challenges I continue to see, regardless of what's going on, or regardless of this pandemic, it's obviously only worse because of COVID and everything that's going on right now, is jobs and housing. So finding jobs is really difficult, even if you're not just coming out or just going through your process, even if you've been out for years and you're presenting how you feel and your legal documents have been changed. There's still layers of anxiety and definite possible discrimination that could happen, and we don't have any law that covers the whole country that protects people from that. So regardless of if that is reality or not, that fear is real. And so I know people who they haven't experienced discrimination yet, but they simply won't even go and apply or do interviews in their field, and they just got a good degree that they could have a good job with, but that anxiety and that fear is real, right? Because they are trans persons, they don't know how that's going to go. And then the housing issue is huge, regardless of if you're, trans masculine, trans feminine, non-binary, as a trans person, even just as an LGBTQ plus person, it's something that we really don't have resources for, that we can, confidently and comfortably say, hey, there's this resource, or here's this, shelter or housing place you can go to, and yes, you will absolutely be safe there, or you will be comfortable there. So those are the biggest real, systemic overall issues I see, that the community faces overall.
It's interesting. We had a question come in from Ian Hill, who says, I'm from San Francisco, Oakland area, and I just moved to Florida, and I have not, in caps, found it welcoming at all, in caps. Please do share info on communities that felt or feel so welcoming. So let me put this out to the group. Anybody want to take a stab at that? I know, and let me kind of preface this. I always tell what I think is a funny story is, MAP and different organizations on the national level put out these charts, right? And they have the states kind of shaded based on their progress of social equality for the LGBTQ community. And there's the South, and then Florida is always one shade better. So I often say that we're the best of the worst.
And we're all over the place.
And we're all over the place, yeah.
Right, and we're all over the place. But, gentlemen, your thoughts on Florida? What are your thoughts in reference to Florida, where we stand in reference to the rest of the country? And are we making progress? Or
I kind of feel like the world traveler should start.
Yeah.
Right. Me too.
Go ahead. Anybody?
Oh, I kind of feel like the world traveler should start. I don't know. I don't want to put him on the spot. But Ty, I mean, you've been so many places. You've lived in so many places. I haven't lived anywhere else. I've only ever been to other places. So
Yeah.
Okay. So let me be honest. I'm glad Gina said what she said, because she set it up to like perfect example. One thing about Florida, I feel as though, let me say this. When you're in, you're in. When you're not, you're not. When you get in your area, I don't care if you live in Orlando, if you live in Tampa, if you live in Miami. Once you get into certain social those networking groups and you start navigating, I will say that once they have vetted you and feel like you're not gonna like just come in and like use them and just take advantage, then yes, it does become welcoming. But at first, it does seem like they're vetting you, and it does feel a little kind of weird because it's like, hey, we're all trans. Why are you vetting me to be trans? But I think it's a safety mechanism that's kind of unspoken about. And it's one of them things where it's kind of like, if you're not from Florida, you're kind of like, but when you're from there, it's normal because you're from there. That's your community. That's your family, versus being in other places. I would say for me, the groups that when I moved to Orlando, I would say Miracle of Love, they welcomed me like I was their brother the first time we met. Bliss Healthcare took me in with Trans Action. I mean, with their program. And then of course, once I started networking them, Gina, and like I said, once you're in the social group, they start throwing you around places, and then you start getting emails. You're like, how do you even know who I am? You start wondering, and you start being like, okay, now I need to look too much. So it's kind of like, be patient, but you know what I'm saying? But also too, it's also what you make it of too. It's also what you make it. Tell people what you want, what you're looking for, because that particular group might not be for you. And it's not saying that it's a bad group. It's just might be what you're looking for at that time of your transition. So I would say that would be my opinion on that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Ty a little bit on that too. Is obviously like the more liberal areas of Florida, you're going to find those pockets easier. Right. But I think it doesn't necessarily matter. Like I have clients that are even in like Lakeland, Plant City areas that you would think were a little bit more conservative, but they've still found their tribe. Right. Like, and there is a little bit of a vetting. Like I always joke that I go to Pride and people will say hi to me and I don't know who they are. And I know it's because of like my place in the community, but I'm like, and which is great, but it takes time to get there. And Ty's right. You do have to kind of like meet your tribe and get in there. And then your tribe introduces you to their tribe. And then kind of it's like trust by affiliation. Because like if this person trusts you, then other people trust you. So it is, but there is a little bit of distrust there because we're such a transient state that they're like, are you here? What reasons are you here? How long will you be here? Am I only going to trust you for a minute and then you're bouncing out? Like there's a lot of distrust. And so you got to kind of like just be you and let them know, like, this is my life. This is where I'm at. This is who I am. And then kind of take it from there. And then that's the important part, is to not feel like you need to be somebody different to fit in either. Because there's no right or wrong way to be trans, even though sometimes it feels like people tell you that there is. And there's that too. Like, just be I tell my clients all the time, just be you. And that's all you need to worry about. Don't worry about anything else.
Great
Yeah.
point. Yeah, nothing is stronger than being visible and being your authentic self. You do you. Along those same lines of geography, oftentimes people say that Florida is like a number of states. You know, we've got the Panhandle, we've got the North, we've got the I-4 corridor, and then we've got South Florida, basically. And all are very different in ideology, in perspective, in progress, in social equality. Thoughts on that? You know, how do you crack the code of bringing different parts of Florida to the table? Nothing is more evident than the fact that, as we all know, we have over 40 human rights ordinances across the state protecting people in cities and counties, to where now we have 60% of the population roughly is covered against discrimination in housing, employment, and public accommodations due to sexual orientation or gender identity and expression. However, we have this patchwork, and we do not have a state non-discrimination law. So, thoughts on that? Where do we go from there? How do we connect the dots in reference to, should the strategy remain a localized approach? When they go low, we go local kind of approach. We keep, attacking, social justice in counties and cities, or do we stay the course and we continue to push for the Competitive Workforce Act to be passed in Tallahassee? It's been 10 years. It's been a hard fight, and oftentimes it's frustrating for advocates who continue to fight to get this passed, and we meet the same arguments. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that something that, Equality Florida is doing really well that, I'm involved with, and I think that most of us are involved with, is the Transaction Florida Advisory, Committee. And that's a good way to, because we'll be on a call and we have people from all over the state to update us on what is going on in their area, what their efforts are, what, similarities we're struggling with, and how we can come together as a whole, to not just attack that in one city or one county, but all over the state, right? Because if somebody's doing it right, then why can't we do it in every other area, right? So I think that's a great start, because I think that ultimately, yeah, the Equality Florida Act the Competitive Workforce Act is great, and it's going to continue to be a struggle. I'm sure we're getting there, though, right? There are other issues too that we just need to work on as a whole, and we really have to come together and bridge those gaps, and put literal, maybe virtual bridges, and a Zoom and all these meeting things are creating, great spaces to allow us to do that even more during, COVID, to reach out to people in all different areas and connect on that level to make sure that we are working towards equality on the whole level, the whole state of Florida. That's what I think.
Here.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Yeah, I think there's a little bit of both. I think, we still try to get the Competitive Workforce Act passed if we can, but we also need to come together, and if there is a local issue, like, we have to face that local issue and go for that local issue, and come together throughout the state. Like, there's a lot, we are like this little patchwork of a state, and it is hard sometimes to figure out, like, the issues that we have in St. Pete are totally different than some of those different conservative areas. And so in those conservative areas, we won't have a choice but to go local if we have to protect someone or do something. But obviously, to give up on that more global, localized state, even though it's been 10 years and it is frustrating, I've been seeing things over 15 years that still frustrate me, but, like, we still have to do that too, because I think it's just important to, if we can get it passed, and it's getting better every time we go up there, we get more and more people kind of on our side. If we can get it passed, then that's just kind of the blanket, and we'll still have local issues that we'll still have to hit, because even though that's passed, we're still going to have local areas that still need us to protect children or to protect other things as well. So I think we kind of need both. Absolutely need both.
Yeah, absolutely. Ty, you want to add to that?
Yeah, just I want to say quickly. I think just for my opinion, for observation, I think I would look at how California, like how New York did their plan. Looking at tackling I do agree that we need to come together because there's a lot of gaps that's missing. But along the lines of more on the groundwork, there are a lot of communities that are missing. There are a lot of marginalized communities that are not even talked about, or even with the intersections. So I feel as though, I'm gonna speak for myself. I know I'm just me being a Black trans man. I'm privileged to be on a call like this, but I have other brothers that don't even have nowhere near the type of privilege that I have. So therefore their voices are not even heard or whatever. So therefore it's like, I think we need to like rearrange the approach where tackling, like, even if you start from like the South and work your way up to Tallahassee, but we have to come together with more of missing these gaps that are missing. I feel like you're stronger in numbers, and you can keep on going to the Capitol all day and keep on talking all day. But when you start tackling each county, these big areas one by one, it starts breaking them down, these walls. You have nothing by the time you get to Tallahassee, you have nothing but to crack and say, you know what, I have to give into them. But it's missing those marginalized, those small areas, I think, which are like the missing gaps to complete the puzzle.
That's a great point, and that's a great segue into the next question that I wanted to pose to the group is, as we know, during the time of COVID-19, that we're seeing the disparities, racial disparities, economic disparities, healthcare disparities are being especially exacerbated right now. And we're seeing, the layers of complexity of racial inequality as well as gender inequality, layers and layers of these things that are really raising their ugly head during COVID-19. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts in reference to, what can we do as a community, in community coming together, either at a local level or at a state level? What can we do to support the community during this very difficult time? I kind of see we're being assaulted with proposed legislation, administrative acts from the Trump administration, pushing back against trans rights and protections that are impacting us in healthcare, impacting us in criminal justice issues, even impacting us in reference to homeless shelters and things like that. So thoughts on that? How as a community, can we push back against that? Lucas.
I think there needs to be, and this is something that I've been working on, at least in my role at Metro, and I forgot to mention this earlier when we were talking about those disparities, is reaching, like, specific outreach towards more trans people of color. Because what we see at Metro, and even though we're in, 3 different counties and 4 different cities, and we consider ourselves, working with more marginalized populations, we have a diverse clientele, but when it comes to our trans population, it's not very diverse. We're not reaching a lot of folks. We're not reaching a lot of trans people of color, and that, I think, in my research and the work that I've done there for about 5 years, has to do with the fact that the trans people of color that we need to reach, or that might need our services, don't even know that we exist, right? Or they can't get to us, or they can't access us for whatever reason that is. So we have to find a way to go to them. And so that's something that we've been working on doing, at least on the healthcare level, because a lot of trans folks, especially trans women, we see this on a daily basis, but less with people of color, will actually come to us, and even if they're homeless and don't have a job, or are struggling with things that you'd really consider like those main needs, right? They want to go ahead and move forward with starting their transition, their medical transition, right, and getting on hormones and things like that, because they don't even feel comfortable looking for a job or even thinking about that until they're presenting in a way that they feel it would be more accepting to them as feminine or a woman or anything like that, right? And so with that, it is a lot of times people's first step in their need to access whatever type of healthcare or transition related service is, what they're best for them, or, meets what they're looking for. And in order to do that, they need to know that there's a place that they can get it, that not only might be accessible to them in other ways if we can work with them, but it's also more affordable, and that word is very general, more affordable than the care they might be getting even if they're self-medicating. And they just don't know that because we haven't been able to reach them, right? So that's something that we're working on in my division at Metro. We've been working on it for a while. This, COVID, everything has obviously gotten in the way. We're not doing any outreach right now, and all of that, so it's slowed down the process. But we're really trying to focus on that, because that's one of the main things that we're seeing And in general, that's one of the ways that we can be reaching out and helping, more trans people of color, because, it's a huge need. And no matter how far along we move forward, we still, our trans siblings of color are still behind, because they're still facing way more, layers than we are when it comes to discrimination and disparities and things like that. So it's really important to keep that in mind, and for us to keep ourselves in check, and for those of us who have privilege to make sure that we continue fighting for that, because we didn't get here without other people fighting with or for us as well, right? So I think that's super important to note as well.
Yeah, well said. Any other comments on that?
Yeah, I would say, I would say definitely we have to definitely bridge the gap, but I think accountability. We have to, we got to start calling it out. You have organizations where, it might be cis-led or whatever case may be, and it's not right, but because, you might be getting funding, you don't want to say anything. That's not right. It's not okay, but your group is protected and you're pocketed, so you're not going to say anything. You're just as bad. You're just as guilty. So I think that's also making it hard too, because I know, for instance, speaking for some of my brothers, for instance, you say, Lucas, I'm glad you said trans people of color. Some people don't even like the term people of color. Depending on where you at, you're black or you're brown. You're black or you're black. And stop taking away. You saying people of color, it's taking away my blackness. Just so simple like that. I'm definitely not saying you are, but just a prime example. I'm saying how some people have taken it. And it's like we have to get back to even respecting each other, one another, and calling out and saying, hey, I got privilege. So what can I do? You might be a Metro. So what can I call you, Lucas, and say, can you help me do something, whatever, without you saying, well, what do you need from me? This and that, whatever. You see what I'm saying? We have to be able to work together and network without always saying what can I get from it, or whose name's going to be on it, it should not be like that. We have a problem. It's affecting all of us. We have to fix the problem. Period.
Yeah. Well said.
Absolutely.
Tristan, anything to add?
No, I think everything was well said. I think there is a need for us to bridge gaps and come together. I've noticed that for years. I've noticed that. It's one of those things that I talk to other people about all the time but how do we do that? And I think Ty's right. A lot of times it's just people need to be able to pick up the phone and say, I need this from you, without wondering what do you who's going to get credit for it. I hear that a lot. That conversation comes up a lot, even with me in private practice. I call people, I don't need anything from anybody, but people are still wondering, what do you want from me? And I'm like, nothing. I need this person. My client needs help. I need you to figure this out. I don't want anything. I just want my client to get the help that they need. I don't care what color they are. I don't care. I just need them to get some help. And sometimes the pushback is or what can you give me in return? And I'm like, you should want to just help me help my client. It shouldn't be that complicated. But unfortunately, there is sometimes this, people want something in return, or are afraid I'm going to ask for something big in return. And I don't know how to fix that, but it's
they're wondering, how is this going to benefit us? And the answer is it's benefiting you, because we're helping a community that you serve, and that should be that should be the point of all of this.
Yep.
I think it's twofold in the fact that we have to be very intentional in ensuring that everyone has a seat at the table. And then we also have to be very cognizant that, and we're doing some initiatives now that have really come about due to COVID-19, of supporting trans-led initiatives that are supporting the trans Black community in various parts of the state. So, being very intentional, being very direct, while we're still creating, spaces for intersectionality within our community. There's been a lot of buzz in our questions from our audience, and thank you everybody out there for being so engaged, but a lot of discussion in reference to the faith community. We all know, sadly, that oftentimes when we're fighting for human rights ordinances, when we're pushing for school board policy changes, who's our opposition? It's the faith community who buses people in by the hundreds, who are messaged and prepared, and I'll say the same thing, but are a very coordinated effort to push back against trans rights. So, question was, how many of our panelists belong to, if you want to share this, I know it's personal, but belong to faith organizations? And what is perhaps the secret sauce in reaching out to the faith community to have them better understand the trans community? Ty, let's start with you on this one, if you could. We'll put you on the spot.
That is okay. So faith is, I'm a Black man from the South, so I'm come from a Kojic religious background. I come my grandmother's apostolic, very, very church every Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, very heavy. It took me a while to really accept my faith, but I would say that navigating, you have to find your own way. It's really hard because I know for me, you have generations where you come up in churches. Most church families, their churches are mostly formed together with families. So your mom, your aunts, your sisters, they all go to this church. They're all part of this family. So when you're not a part of it, you feel like you've now you've left the family or whatnot. I am a part of a faith-based organization. They're very open. They're Baptists. We don't really talk about the LGBT situation, where it's one of the things where my pastor always says that we accept you for who you are. He knows, he's never shunned me. He's never made me feel like I'm not accepted. When he does talk about it, he's always talking more positive, like, that might not be your lifestyle, but accept them for who you are. But I know that it's very, very hard, and it's a very hard road to walk, and it's not easy. And it's one of them really sensitive situations and topics that I know we don't like talking about. But the first thing I would always say is find yourself first, and find whatever relationship you have, not religious, but relationship you have with whatever higher being that you accept, whatever calling that may be.
Amazing. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Just your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I actually am in an interesting place with faith and spirituality in general right now. I had a really negative experience that I'm not afraid to talk about in my church that I was involved in when I came out, and I was completely kicked out and removed from everything in that church. My family unfortunately still attends that church, and I did for a while go on the other side of things, kind of just to prove a point that I could be there, and they couldn't tell me I couldn't. And so I would go on Easter and Christmas type of thing, sometimes on Mother's Day, because my mom would ask me to. And it just began to, as I got older and more comfortable and confident as myself, it began to feel very, very, very uncomfortable for me. And I just didn't know why I was doing it. I didn't quite identify with that religion anymore. I really don't know necessarily what I believe in. We don't have to get into all of that, but I certainly didn't feel like that was the place for me, especially because of the hate and the hurt that I had suffered when I came out from that specific congregation. So I think it's been about 2 years now that I specifically told my mom, I will not be attending any church service with you again. And I did stop going. I think this Christmas was the first Christmas I didn't go. This past Easter was maybe the second or third Christmas I didn't go. And so I did finally create that separation for myself. I'm not sure, where I identify when it comes to faith religion. I'm definitely a spiritual person. I definitely believe that there's, a higher power, but I'm still kind of just in this this zone where I'm still healing from the experience that I had, because it was so painful. Especially because those were the people that I thought would love me and accept me no matter what. At least that's what they always said, right? So that was something that was really, really hard for me to move past. I feel I'm still healing from that. And I am aware that there are tons of accepting congregations now. If anybody is looking for any MCC or UCC church, you can look them up online to find one in your area. There's a great one in Tampa. There's a great MCC and a great UCC in Tampa. There's a great MCC and a great UCC in St. Pete. And then there's also some other organizations that don't necessarily identify with those terms or those types of congregations or whatever, but they are open and affirming, and that's what you want to look for, is open and affirming.
Yeah.
Amen to that. Tristan, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I consider myself a recovering Catholic, and but I miss church community sometimes. And so when I feel like I need to, Lucas is right. There's tons of open and affirming churches, Unitarian, Universalist, Metropolitan Community churches, and every now and again I miss just going into a place and having that community. And so once a year, maybe, I get the urge to go find one. And I do, and I just go and I get that, and knowing that they're affirming, and just go in and kind of get that love that I need. And then I'm kind of out, because similar to Lucas, like, I did have some pretty bad experiences. And so I'm not quite at a point where I want to like dive in and become like a regular per se. But every now and again, I'm like, I think I just need to feel some love. Like, I kind of miss that. I mean, the good part, I mean, there's some bad parts about being Catholic, but like, usually, I mean, I grew up in a church. I went to school at that church. Like, that church was my family for many years until I moved out of the state. And so every now and again, I just miss that sense of community. Yeah. And as long as I can get that, and as long as I walk into a place that I know will affirm me and not tell me I'm going to hell, then I feel like I can get that love when I need it, to kind of fill my tank up, as I call it. And then I'm good for a while. Yeah.
Wow. That is so powerful. And the feeling of belonging and validation, you know, wherever you can find it is so powerful. Let me shift gears a little bit with you gentlemen and talk about a concept that I find very fascinating. Female and male privilege. You know, I know experiences in my own personal journey, senior VP at a major banking organization. After I transitioned, I immediately noticed that I no longer had the privilege that I used to have as a male vice president and now a female vice president. So if you would share, you know, your personal feelings of, have you experienced that? I know on the other, you know, on the flip side, I've been shushed, I've been called sweetie, I've been dismissed in meetings where I used to be the voice in the room. And you know, I know your journey perhaps is opposite. So feelings on that. Lucas, why don't you kick us off if you have
Oh, I was thinking Tristan should go first, because I feel like he's had the most experience.
Oh yeah,
you know, like
it's been a while. Oh God, yeah. Well, it's funny because every time I go, like, I do a lot of university conversations where I go back to like mental health counseling. Like, my old school will have me in to talk about like the trans experience for mental health counselors, and inevitably, almost every time I go, someone asks me about what it's like to now have male privilege. So people are aware that it happens. And I think for me, like, I don't know, it's really weird for me to actually be heard, where before I wasn't. Like, you know, Gina lost her voice, I gained mine. I might not even have any experience in the conversation at all, but the presumption is I do. That's very weird for me. I tell stories though on the opposite side of that, of like being able to walk up to women and children before and not being able to walk up to women and children as much now. Because of fear. And it took me, like, I mean, I'm used to it now, but 12, 13, 14 years ago, like, I was like, what is happening? Like,
because that's kind of a feminine thing. I'll go up, oh, kitties. And
right. Oh, what a cute baby. And they're like, step back. Like, what do you want? What?
Yeah.
Listen, man, you better step back.
Bearded curve that's attacking my kids, right?
Right. And just one, and I think too, like, I mean, it's funny that like that people ask me this question, but I'm also in a field that is mostly a female based. Like, there's far more female counselors than there are male counselors. And so whether, I'm not sure like what that means for me that I chose that, but that's interesting because I don't necessarily have that place of privilege within my workspaces. Because because usually the women have that voice, that slightly stronger voice in the mental health field, just because there's more of them than me, per se. Yeah.
Well, do you find that, being somewhat pervasive in reference to, the word I hate, the term I hate, passing?
Oh, God.
From passing to your voice to your expression, there is that privilege.
Absolutely.
And that's part of it, right? That's part of the dynamic. That's part of the getting used to that and that kind of thing. So, Lucas, how did that feel to you?
Did you say me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I experienced a lot on both sides, actually. It's actually really funny, because I was raised in such a stereotypical home and environment and area, right? And there were times where I was really masculine when I was a little kid, and that was okay. But then when I grew up, it was absolutely not okay. I couldn't leave the house unless I was in a dress. I couldn't, go to the wedding, and I wasn't not going to the wedding. So there was no option for me. I was literally told, you're a girl, you have to do this, right? And I experienced a lot of things that unfortunately a lot of women, especially young women, experience, that most cisgender men can't relate to, right? And so they don't understand the experience of being socialized female. And so even interacting with cis men and just other men in general, my experience is so different that it creates a little bit of discomfort for me, and I'm not super comfortable in a room with just any kind of guy, because, or just like a bunch of guys, just because I didn't grow up socializing around all men. In fact, everyone in my life was a woman except for my dad, and so there's that. But then when the tables turned, obviously I have a lot of privilege now. And like Tristan had mentioned, I'm very aware that like if I walk into an elevator, I am always kind of thinking like, oh, I don't want to be in an elevator alone with someone, because I was socialized that that's a fear. But when I get into an elevator and I'm the only person in that elevator with another woman, it's very apparent to me, and it became immediately apparent to me that she is afraid of me, especially as I have grown and I'm not like tiny anymore, right? And so that is very interesting to me, and it makes me sad, also because like I'm also the guy who like I would protect her, like I would want to like, but she doesn't know that, like she doesn't know anything about me, and so it's sad, and I remember that inherent fear too well, right? And I've also experienced really kind of comical discrimination in. I used to work in like a very feminine role at Build-A-Bear when I was in college. It was a lot of fun. I love working with kids. My degrees in education, but I would have people refuse for me to lead their kids' party or even stuff their kids' bear or go anywhere near their children, even though I was very clearly a child. Like I was just like a young boy, but to them there was some form of like almost like treating me like a pedophile or something, and I was 19 years old and looked like I was 12. So like there was nothing creepy about me, it was just the fact that like, oh, why is this man working here with like these kids? And it's like, boys can also like kids, it's okay. So it's been very interesting for me on both sides, but yes, very, very, very apparent. And I've really understood both sides. It's interesting having both sides of the fence, socialization per se.
Yeah. Tyree, what have your experiences been?
I think mine be total opposite. I guess when you say once the past privilege came, it was no one could prepare me what it was feel like to be a black man in America. It was more of I had to be careful with how my tone was. I had to be careful how I walked down the street. I had to. It was totally different. Being transition. I mean, I was always. I guess I was a trans masculine before I was a trans man, but it's nowhere was like the fear I have now is nowhere the fear I had before transitioning. So that just plain is what it is. I just have to always make sure I'm on my P's and Q's. But I will say that the advantage of is what I realized with like my trans sisters or whatnot that don't have that voice or haven't taken advantage. I've been able to use my male privilege to be like, hey, that's not okay. Step up and stand for them. Like I kind of agree with Lucas. You want to protect some cis women, but because they see this eligible man and this, and me being a black man, they really clenching their purses like, I got to go. And it's like, okay. So yeah.
That's really hard.
Yeah. That's a really interesting perspective. and very difficult to, process in America today, but sadly our reality.
Yeah, it's also very interesting how different our, just the three of ours experiences are. I was thinking like, especially in that question, I knew our experiences were all going to be so different,
Yeah.
Right. Like I was listening to you, and I'm saying to myself, like, I can imagine just being a man, like like you said, like they clench with you being a man, and it's like, okay, I'm feeling you, and I'm like,
oh, yeah.
Whew. Right. And now to add the color on top of it, so it's just like,
and I can't even imagine.
Right. So if you look at the different layers, intersections where I don't think people understand, like when it comes to masculinity, it's so many that you have to deal with. And we're all trying to navigate, we're all trying to be there for each other. And it's like, where do we start?
Yeah. And you kind of transitioned into, one of the, what do you call it? Demographics that most fears for, their life on a daily basis, especially when interacting with general people in the in society, right?
Yeah.
Terrifying.
Another layer of discrimination and hate against, community that only gets exacerbated by our diversity, which is sad. Okay, panel, we have time for one more question. We've got a lot of parents out there who are, they want this to go on another hour, and maybe we can do it again, but let's talk to the parents. You have a daughter who is coming out to you or is exhibiting, identifying masculine, who is, you can tell you've had that initial, discussion with, or, you're going through this communication, this process of supporting your transgender son. Tips for parents, thoughts on that. Oftentimes I get, what do I do? Do I get a counselor? Do I get a therapist? Who do I believe? Is it a phase? All of these things. So Ty, what are your thoughts in speaking to our parents out there who might have a trans son?
First thing I would say was just always affirm your child. Always affirm your child and just love your child. Just believe it or not, you could be giving them the okay to come out without even saying you can come out. By just saying, hey, I know you, I know I love you for who you are. Just simple words to say I love you for who you are. It's always affirming your child that no matter what, that they can just come out and say it. Just affirm your child.
Yep.
Yeah. Anything quickly to add?
I would say number one thing is refuse to be your child's first bully. You have no idea the impact that it can have on your child at any age to not accept them as who they are. And as someone who experienced that, I know that even my own parents who now do accept me, I know they're even haunted by the way that they treated me. I know that. I see that in my mom's eyes. I see the pain, and she talks about it. And I think that the way that, to avoid that is also making sure that you know that there are resources out there for you. There are support groups, trans parent support groups at Metro. We can get you that information. I'm sure there's stuff across the state in different areas. Reach out to somebody who can help you find those resources. There are PFLAG chapters all over the place. You just need to get out and talk to other folks who are experiencing what you're experiencing and have children who are trans identified. That's really all you need, is to have a conversation with them. And I promise a light bulb will come on, and you will learn, and you will, 9 times out of 10, come to want to understand and appreciate your child for who they are. It's just about knowing, and that fear is real. I get it. But if you love your child, you really have to do that for them, because it's important. It's how we keep them alive and healthy and happy.
Wow. Well, gentlemen, I can't think of a more heartwarming way to end our conversation today. We're at the end of our hour. We should have gone 2 hours because it was such good information and so many people wanting to know more. So Lucas, Ty, Tristan, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for kicking off our TransChat Town Hall series. We hope to see everyone back again tomorrow at 5 o'clock for another dynamic session. So once again, community leaders, community advocates, we thank you. Stay safe. And everyone out there, stay safe during this difficult time. And we'll see you tomorrow at 5 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, everyone.
Take care.